Hum inside my heart a little while. Come closer with the honey of your song. Your dance is a code, is a pathway to what's given. I am learning how to listen.
Hello, friends. Welcome to today's episode. Today, we're bringing on a very special guest that I am so excited to have. Cassia Karen is joining us to share her wisdom and her path to wholeness. Dance, poetry, and songways are the channels through which life, ceremony, motherhood, and connection have flowed for Cassia. With 20 years of experience in performing arts management and performance, she has been teaching movement, dance, and yoga classes in the Kootenays since 2013. The desire to shift into ceremony, myth, and movement came after the birth of her daughter in 2019. As becoming mother revealed the reality of a new body, a feminine body, that needed receptivity and support to heal and thrive again, it was the catalyst for cultivating community. Earth connection and the intelligence of the body have been the guideposts for Cassia's personal dive into healing her relationship to Irish, British, and European ancestral lineage, as well as to herself. Since 2019, Cassia has completed her training with Innate Traditions as a postpartum care practitioner and Mamata Yoga perinatal yoga teacher training. Been attuned to Reiki level 1 and 2, and is now walking on a woman's spiritual pilgrimage under the teachings of Carolyn Hillier in Dartmoor, Britain. Living dyads are the way we move into deeper intimacy with ourselves, our partners, and our communities through ritual, reverence, rhythm, and remembrance. As we remember our unity, we must also acknowledge and embrace our duality, and it's here that we dance together as dyad. And Cassia had one more message to share with all you listeners. Her values are in the flesh and blood world, the places and spaces where we walk, touch, and feel, smell, and taste, and lastly, see. Her heart is in encouraging everyone to fully live where their bodies reside. We are a part of a whole and we belong to the earth. So before we begin, may we all take some time to ground into this space and into ourselves. Let's begin by taking a deep inhale through the nose. And exhale out the mouth. Thank you all so much. Let's begin. Hello, Cassia. Thank you so much for joining me here on the Lost Sutras Podcast.
Thank you so much, Danya, for having me here. I'm so looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. It's been such an honor getting to meet you through Earth Daughters Festival and then seeing your path unfold from there. And yeah, you were just such a brilliant light at that gathering. And so I'm really excited that we get this opportunity to connect a little deeper.
Yeah, it feels like a million years ago that we were on that land dancing naked on the cliff. But yeah, it feels really cool to connect with you in this completely different space and to share what's been happening in the months that have passed.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear. So let's begin with learning more about you. Who is Cassia? How did you arrive here in this space?
Well, I've become a bit of a myth worker in the last 6 months. And so as we begin to just sit into the seat of the here and now, that I am sitting here with my mother line, my father line behind me. I sit here with the blessing of Spirit, Creator. And I am deeply grateful to be able to hold hearth in Kimberley, BC here. And who am I? Well, who is anyone? I've come to a place in my life where the who am I question, it doesn't sit inside of identities very much anymore. But if I have to place a hat or a role or a name into my existence, I would say that I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I am a sister. I am a sister in circles of flesh and blood women here in the East Kootenays of British Columbia. And I am in flesh and blood etheric circles with women all over the world through the work and the things that I'm learning right now about my ancestry in Britain and in Ireland and in Germany. And the who am I in this iteration of this lifetime. I've been given really incredible access to gifts of writing, of poetry, of story weaving, of movement, dance. I've been given the opportunity to train in yoga, in Reiki, and now I am starting into shamanic apprenticeship and learning as much as I can about the tools and the ways in which I can be in impeccability and integrity with how I sit here in these lands, the lands of the traditional Tanaha, the Akiskanek, and it's really a funny place to be sitting in a body that is, we all have these labels, we all have to be in these boxes because that's the nature of being alive in duality, and to also understand how very much we are all within the field and the web, and we all are interconnected, and that's a very real thing for me in my life right now. So I'm a thread in the web. That's what I am. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm excited to unravel this web a little further and learn more about your particular thread and how you've been weaving into the cosmic consciousness through that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd
Yeah.
love to I'd love to hear more about your work over the last 6 months as a myth worker. I would love to hear more about what exactly that is and what that has brought into your life.
Well, I firstly would say that the word myth worker really has only landed in my understanding in my consciousness in the last year and a half, 2 years, which is interesting because reading myth and fantasy and writing has been a part of my life since I was 10 years old. So, words and wordplay and lyricism and songwriting, these are all very much a part of my inheritance through my bloodlines, but also deepening into the spiritual practice of myth worker, which is to engage in writing or receiving. In shamanic practice, it's often called journeying, where we go on journey. And I know that also in deeper shamanic practices, and that word can also be a little loaded. I know there's a lot of understanding about the shamanism that comes from, Peru and Brazil and the Amazonian practices, and also the shamanic medicine people of Turtle Island and all of the different nations here in Canada and in the US. But shamanka and shaman are also words that come from the tundras, and they come from Russia, they come from Finland, they come from Norway. And there are shamanic practices in the UK which have been starting to come back into our consciousness, starting to be rewoven together by people who are deeply wanting to walk in integrity with their ancestral ways. In Britain, in Scotland never really let go. They've fought for it for a long time all over Europe. But there are traditional practices that are for everyone and come from every lineage. So the myths that I'm specifically really sinking into because of the work that I have found of several women storytellers from Ireland and from the States are Irish primarily. And I'm looking now more into the myths that come from Britain. So pre-colonial Britain, pre-Roman Britain, pre-Christian. And so these myths are about gods, goddesses, they're about individual people. There's a lot of tales that kind of come through the hero or heroine tradition. And there's a lot of spiritual practices that are embedded in these stories. So yeah, in the last 6 months, I've been reading deeply, reading different versions of these stories, and then sitting into not my own version, but my own imaginal realms, my own mytho-poetic space around where do these stories land actually in my physical body, and what kind of landscapes or pictures do I see in my own mind when I'm hearing them or reading them. And often around full moon time, I'm able to sit down and I'm able to take all these different threads and I'm able to kind of, stir in the cauldron, and they become a different thing. And I'm able to write. I'm able to write or tell a story that comes from these threads. So, for example, January's full moon is the wolf moon in European traditions. And there's, hundreds of different names for this full moon lunation all over the world. It's called something different. And all of those names are tied in with the season and what's happening specifically in the land and in the space. And so myth working is about what is happening in the literal physical landscape. It's also about what is happening in that moon time's energetic. So a wolf moon for me really came into the work that Sharon Blackie from the UK has done around retelling myths. She has a book called Foxfire Wolfskin, and she has done her own renditions of different folk tales and myths from all over Europe. And she rewrote one that was called Wolfskin. And I found the original one that she had read online. And then I dove into researching wolves. And actually, this is the time when wolves mate. This is when they begin to mate, and the alpha female, she becomes the dominant. She's the matriarch of the pack, of the family. And so I was able to write a story, a journey that leads the listener into a wintry landscape where we put on our wolf skins and we run on 4 feet, and we are part of the pack. And we feel what it is to become so self-possessed that we do not hesitate. We are fully embodied in our instincts. And so myth working is, to me, is drawing in an understanding of place, of landscape, geography, symbology, the ancient ways that these symbols and stories are told, and then creating something so that other people can tap into their own imaginal landscape and find their own mythical existence, which will then feed their creative heart so that they go back into their lives and they howl at their own moon and they live from that place of deep embodied understanding that we're not just going to work and paying bills and, doing all these daily tasks, which are in a way our prayers to our lives, but that we are also creating our own myths every day. within our own living. So this has become a really deep calling of my heart, and it's been fairly effortless. I really love writing. It's been really fun to do that and to invite other people into it.
Wow, thank you so much for that share. I could just feel your passion dripping with every word that came through. So thank you for doing that work and creating that offering. I have been reading some Sharon Blackie, and I started with If Women Rose Rooted, and it's such a potent book. And in my last podcast I just did with Ash, she also brought up a Sharon Blackie book, the Hagitude book. And so it's really beautiful to see these matriarchs coming back into the world and bringing back this ancestral bridge for us to connect to our own bloodlines, right?
Mm.
And I love how she's inspired you to rewrite these ancestral stories in your own words. And she even talks about another woman in California who's doing that in the book, If Women Rose Rooted. So, again, it's just so potent to see women reclaiming these stories and reclaiming these connections to, again, our bloodlines, but also to the land, because that's what inspires these stories, is that connection to the earth and to the seasons and the cycles.
Mm.
So thank you for sharing that and for inspiring that mythical existence within humans and that invitation to find those prayers to our lives. I love those quotes that you just shared. So thank you.
Mm. Yeah.
As a writer and as a poet, I'd love to dive deeper into words and word magic. There's a couple of words you shared that I have been unraveling in my own life. I also come from European ancestry. My mother is Ukrainian and my dad is Croatian, and so the Eastern Slavic traditions runs in my bones and in my blood. Yet I am also situated here in the West Kootenays and living on land that is not my ancestral land. And as I've been unearthing and reconnecting to earth-based wisdom, which is what I like to note it as, there have been other terms that have been coming up. So one of them is shaman, and I dove deeper into that word and found out exactly like you shared that it's actually rooted in a specific tribe in northern Russia. But now that word has become like a portal around the world to again explain earth-based practices. Because when we say the word shaman, that invokes certain ideals within everybody who hears that word, right? And so I'd love to hear more about your connection to that word shaman and what that has unraveled for you.
Oh, yes, I've been deep diving on that word because that word doesn't actually sit right in my body. So there's two words that have come into my consciousness. One about a year and a bit ago, and it's from Ireland, and it is the word Bianfasa, and it is the word for wise woman. And this word is essentially, and the other word that's often used in Ireland for a healing woman or a woman of sort of magical abilities is Kaliak, which is also the name of the incredibly powerful, earth creator goddess in Ireland and in Scotland. So today actually is the day that begins the portal of Imbolc in the Celtic wheel. And the Celtic wheel is a wheel of the seasons and the high holy days that was not just in Ireland, it was actually pan-European. And there were different ways of expressing the wheel. There is actually a wheel that comes from Slavic tradition, specifically, with its own names and its own dates. They're all lunar solar wheels and calendars that are pre-Christian. So this word Bianfasa, it's the woman who tends the portals of life. She sees babies in and she sees people out when they die. And she is the keeper of so many traditions, herbal healing traditions, prayer traditions, ceremony traditions. So when I discovered this word and this name and this role, I mean, of course, we all know about wise women. We all know the witch wound. We all know what happened to those women during the witch trials. And we are those women. We're the granddaughters and the grandsons, and we are those people descended from those people who were alive, because they were just people just like us doing their daily prayer and their work. So Bianfasa is the first word, and the second word actually comes through the Druidic traditions. And I didn't find this word until after Earth Daughters last summer. And when I first read it and I first heard it, actually, sorry, pardon me. The first time I heard it was actually at Imbolc last year, because the goddess Bridget and the saint Bridget in Ireland were being celebrated. And it was the first national bank holiday in Ireland honoring the matron goddess Bridget. So the woman who wrote this incredible poem, she channeled it for honoring Bridget at this time of year. Her name is Laura Murphy, and she is an activist. She's a writer. She's a poet, and she was the first person that I heard this word actually apply to. So this word is fili, F-I-L-I, fili. And this was an order of the Druids. So there are several orders in the Druidic tradition that I've been learning about. And this was an order that was almost like the right hand to the kings of ancient Ireland. And this was a person who, through lineage and through gift, was a poet seer. And they had practices that allowed them to access source, to access, what are the words that we have for creative flow? We have Shakti. We have these ways of understanding how when you suddenly get into a creative space, and like words or music or movement or painting or whatever the creative flow is, when it comes in and you just write or you create, you're in a frenzy. So Fili, or the Filid, would they would purposefully do certain practices to get into a trance state, to do prophetic poetry. And that's what she practices. And this practice is called imbas forosnai. And this practice is about bringing a fire into the head. And that's creative fire to me. That's how I interpret it. So reading about the Fili and reading about these practices, but also that this is an intrinsic gift. For many, you have to like, it's a muscle and you have to engage it. And I think that's true of creative flow. We have to open our channels and we have to engage with ourselves. But this was such an incredible discovery for me, because this word gave me a direct feeling into what it is that I feel when I'm suddenly given a poem. And I have to pick up my phone and open my notes and I have to write it down right now. And I've experienced that since I was a kid. And my mom is also an artist and a musician, and she has written pieces of music that are absolutely out of the ether, as are my brothers, all three of them, and my father and my grandparents on both sides. This is something that I know exists in people all over the world when they come into creative flow. And finding this name for it was jaw-dropping, truly, for me, because I've learned a ton through my yogic studies, through the Hindu traditions, and holy cow, they're intact, and they are, holy cow, that's hilarious. I said that. Their traditions are quite intact. Their writings and their ancient sacred texts are intact. But in Europe, they're in shreds, and they are being remembered. They are being brought back together by people doing incredible work all over. In Wales, at the University of Wales, they have an entire department studying Proto-Celtic languages and remembering the mythology. In Ireland, it's the same. So, there's this really beautiful way that we can access the gifts of creative flow and spirit and contact through understanding these ancient ways that existed for so long before they were torn apart by colonialism and by the Christian church, the dogmatic Christian church. So when I read that word Fili, I felt a deep resonance and absolute gnosis come into my body that the practice of Imbas Forosnai is definitely what's happening. But for me, it's like, now I know what it is. Now I want to be able to channel it. And I want to be able to channel it for the benefit of anyone who wants to read what I write, or anyone who wants to be in contact with their own inner channel and comes across what I write. So yeah, words are powerful. Words and language is our meaning. It's how humans connect and communicate. And the other place that I would say that words have done an absolute deep dive for me in the last 2 years is I found a woman named Carolyn Hillier, who lives on a large piece of land in the Dartmoor area, which is the southwestern portion of England. And she has been doing remembering work through her music, through her art, through her writings, for going on 40 years. And so I began pilgrimaging with her on her newly launched, only about a year and a half ago, Weaver's Trail. And she writes most of her music. She weaves Proto-Celtic languages and words with English. She is teaching women how to write their own songs and inspiring women how to write their own songs and stories using Proto-Celtic and English. And the first time I heard her sing in Proto-Celtic was in a video, and I wept. I was on my knees in my kitchen. This was a language that filled my mouth with memory. And I know now that when that happens to me, there is something so deep in my DNA that is reminding me. It's reminding me of what we all were, who we all were before we became subjected to violence. And then we perpetuated that violence. The responsibility to go back to the root of every word. I don't use the regular dictionary anymore. I use the etymology online dictionary because I want to go to the root. We talk about root cause protocols a lot in, integrative health and wellness, which is an area that I have been walking in my own ways as well for about 10 years. And language also needs root cause protocols. The words we speak are spells, and we each need to take responsibility for our languaging. And so this has become another deep passion of mine, is how to sing in languages that, used to be dead, but are being remembered by people in the lands where my family came from. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for your power and for bringing all of that back to life through you. And it sounds like you've had some really potent teachers along the way that have inspired your direction and your flow. But it takes a lot to also say yes and really commit to that practice and to that offering and that work. So thank you for doing all of that. There is another word. I really love etymology as well. So there's another word that I've been playing around with in my mind for a while, and I would love to hear your take on it before we move into some other aspects. And it was brought up briefly. You have brought up other, I'm guessing, more Celtic words like Feely. I'm guessing that's a Celtic lineage. But in English, we call them witches, and we talked about the witch hunt and the witch burnings. You brought that up briefly. And so I have my own connection to that word and my own understanding, but I'd love to hear your unraveling of that word and how maybe the history changed the perception of it and how it again is being remembered in more of a traditional way.
Oh, yeah. That word, it carries a lot of weight and a lot of, for lack of a better word, baggage in our modern understanding. I think that the work that people have been doing in specifically a movement in Scotland to have the church and state make declarations of acknowledgement of the burning and the hanging of women and men under the law of, anti-witchcraft, that they would absolve all of those judgments, that everything would be overturned, and that there would be monuments made and built in all of the places where these deaths occurred. And it's happening. It's been happening for well over a year now. And the government in Scotland did issue in their legislature responsibility and an apology. And I participated a few years ago in it was an art display, it was global. A woman who's an artist, textiles and painting. She does many different mediums, but she created this. She found the lists with all the names of all of the people who had been killed during the witch trials in all of the UK. So Scotland, Wales, Britain. I can't remember if there was Irish names as well. I think that was not part of it, but they found the lists that were all part of the public record from those times, and she called it the Medicine Spoon Memorial. And so if you were interested in decorating a linen piece of cloth and you were given a name and you were to paint or embroider or decorate this spoon, which she hand traced all of these names and all of these spoons onto these pieces of cloth, and then she mails it to you. You do your honoring of this person, and then you send it back. And it was to join all of the other spoons that were sent all over the world, really, actually. There's a consciousness shift, and it's been happening for a while now. I would say the consciousness shift, in my perception and in my experience, has really kicked into high gear since 2012. And the consciousness around the word witch has been shifting as rapidly, that people are identifying as witches and saying, I am a witch and I am the descendant of witches. And that word simply means wise woman. It simply means wise man. It simply means one who is connected to the place where they live, to the plants, to the trees, to the rocks. It's simply someone who's connected to their community and serves their community in sickness, in death, in birth, in the places where most people don't want to be. And I think that that is something that has come out of secularization of our consciousness. We've really moved away from, a lot of people have just moved away from the Christian stronghold on spiritual experiences. I grew up in the church. I grew up with, all of the rhetoric and all of the stories and all of the mythology and all of the symbols of that tradition. And I loved it. I mean, I didn't know any better, but some things happened in my life in my late teens and early 20s that made me see hypocrisy in the messaging and in the actions. And so it was like, how can this be? How can this be that we say we come from love, but then our behaviors and our choices when people are struggling is actually the opposite? That the expression of love and acceptance that I came to understand as what Jesus taught is actually not how we are behaving. And so I left the church, and then it came into my consciousness through my 20s that actually Mary Magdalene she was the key. And I knew that even in my teens. I just felt drawn to her. I knew she wasn't a prostitute. I was like, no fucking way. No way. And she walked me through my 20s and back into my body, and back into spiritual connection, and back into earth connection and blood connection. And so I came to understand that, okay, like these magical properties and these experiences of spirit inhabiting my body when I was younger and in the church, these are things freely given by the web of weird. These are things freely given by the field of consciousness that I exist in and that I'm always held in. So the word witch, I knew about the witch trials, but I didn't understand how it was that the church was so at the forefront during that time of demonizing human beings who were simply operating as servants to their communities in health, wellness, birth, and death. And I think our consciousness now, because we have said no to dogma, a lot of us, most of us. And I think we're in a transition point. And so it's like we're having to get right and reintegrate language around these ways of operating with one foot in the world and one foot in the other world, truly, or in the spirit world, that we're having to find language that helps us understand what that is without there being a domineering, overarching church presence. And so words like shaman, shamanka, fili, even bard, druid, bianfasa, these words are coming back into our lexicon. Witch. What is a witch? I mean, there's also the really interesting modern interpretation through the New Age sort of process. And I think, those words and those ways of expressing have done a lot of reclamation work around what it is to be a community wise person. And there's still work to be done. I think it's both in the 3D realms of the judicial, the legislative, the way that Scotland is putting up monuments to these human beings who lost their lives. And also it is in how are we now going to hold these titles or these ceremonial practices in a way that honors every tradition, because it is global. It is a global need. And I don't have an answer for that, but I definitely think the word witch has been helping us sculpt that, because there is such a wound around what happened in that time, especially in the European consciousness and in the European connection to earth-based spiritual practices.
Thank you so much for making those connections between those words, witch, druid, shaman, as you noted. I agree with you that those words are used for these potent wisdom keepers, and it's been an honor to be in this time noticing that this remembrance is occurring and that there is um, progress moving forward with forgiveness and gratitude and acknowledgement really of just what even occurred and how terrible it really was and how it really did leave those from European ancestry with shreds within the lineage, within knowledge, within connection. And so it's really beautiful being here in this time and seeing there are people that are inspired to weave the shreds back together. And yeah, thank you again for being one of those people and for coming on here and sharing all of your wisdom in that. I have one more question for you. I would love to keep going on this theme of words as you are a poet and a writer. I'd love to hear more about how words have supported your path of healing, both your ancestral connection and your physical connection on the lands that you are living on now.
Yeah. Not a long time ago, early in my healing journey, which really began in 2013 in earnest. And when I say healing, I mean remembering who I am, which I think is what healing is for most of us. I came across yoga and the words of that tradition really sparked a fire in me. Specifically, this word hridaya, which is the sacred heart. So it's not our physical heart, it's a space within the heart, just to the left of center of our sternum in our breast. And this place is also has a name within the Christian tradition, the Gnostic Christian tradition, which is the tradition that I really ascribe to. If I was to say that anything from that lineage really lands for me, it's the Gnostic Gospels, it's the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And they speak about the nous, or the nu, which is the same idea as the hridaya, which is that this space in the spiritual heart inside of our chest is an intertidal zone. It's a place where spirit comes and pools. It comes into us and pools in the center of this space. And then our earthly experiences and how we express ourselves is also coming up and in as we grow and as we become, moving from childhood into a consciousness that comes from our own personal authority and our own autonomy. But that this intertidal zone is where we come into contact with the divine. And so this language dropped me so deeply into what I'm now understanding is actually a part of the embryological development of our physical material bodies out of spirit matter. Like, where do our bodies come from inside of our mothers? How is it that cells simply decide to self-replicate and create all of this intricacy within our own bodies? So this space, this intertidal zone of the spiritual heart, hridaya, nous, these words then fed into every aspect of how I continued to stay in contact with what felt true and what felt really resonant for me. moving through the last 10 years of my life. And how do I make choices from that place? How do I use that information that comes in to stay open to divine guidance and to stay open to the voice of intuition, and also to stay rooted in place where I'm walking, and to stay rooted in the reality that I am here. I'm here. I'm in a physical body. I'm not a fairy. I'm not a sprite. I'm not an ethereal body at this time. I am a physical body with physical needs. And so this language just it infused an incredible understanding of the gift of being alive and the gift of being in deep presence with myself, and how that's translated into what I now am really practicing, which is, earth shrines, recognizing that there are places on physical land and earth where I live that have names. And they're not names from the Celtic tradition. They're not names from English. And so a practice that I've started is to attempt to understand place names from the Tanaha. And they have an incredible amount of resources for people to be able to learn place names, not the names that were given to mountains or the names that were given to rivers, but the original place names that have existed for, well over 10,000 years through their tongue. And the way that's really driven that, what's really driven that is understanding that there is an intertidal zone, not only within each of our bodies, but there is an intertidal zone given to us through language. And I realized that very deeply this month, actually, in researching the different names for wolf. So the original Proto-Indo-European word for wolf is ku. And the Proto-Celtic word for wolf is Wailiku. And the word for wolf in Tanaha is Kikun. How is it that these original words, thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away from each other, have a similar phonetic sound? It really just went right into the bottom of my belly, and it made me excited for the intertidal place of understanding that, not only do we have names for events in pre-written history, that there are stories of a flood, a global flood in almost every tradition across the world. Not only do we all have names for a sun god, not only do we all have names for an earth goddess, we also have names for animals, we have names for rivers, we have names for everything. And these names, they hold a frequency. And when we get into the root of what the landscapes are named, the root words, we remember not just an intellectual idea, we remember a wavelength, which is sound. And that's why we have words and use words. That's why we sing. That's why chanting is the way that people, for time immemorial, have sunk deeper into connection and resonance with spirit and with earth. So another way that I've really dropped into wanting to know the place names is also that I've been learning the Proto-Celtic words for different landscapes through my journey on the Weaver's Trail. And my very favorite words these days are Werito, which is wild earth, and Komari, which is the place where our roots meet. And I've been weaving with a lot of this language in dark moon circles with women here in Kimberley for the last 5 months, and I'm going to continue. And these words, they're Proto-Celtic, they're from another continent, but there are words for every season in every language. And if we can open our minds and open our hearts to a frequency of language and words and the way they feel inside of our mouths when we speak them, and to learn the words of the people who have been stewarding and living upon these lands, we're going to come into a deeper resonance with the land itself, going and sitting with a tree and speaking its name. Not just the English word, but, what is the sound that the tree is making, the rock? What is the sound of the waterfall or the creek that you sit next to? I've just found so much healing. I've found so much connection through allowing the frequency of words, the hum and the hit of a consonant, the openness of a vowel, that those phonetic sounds really can come into the cellular material of my body. And every sound we hear is poetry. Even the siren on the ambulance, when we hear that sound, can we hear the keening wail of grief? When we hear, the laughter of children playing at the playground, what do we hear? It's just, yeah, let's take our eyes out of the equation and hear things and feel things differently in our bodies, so that we feel place actually in our bodies. And I think sound is a really, really easy way to do that. And words have sounds. So let's let that be a prayer that comes out of our mouths and into our ears.
Thank you so much, Cassia. That was so beautiful to hear you unravel the magic of words. So thank you so much for coming on here and sharing as much wisdom as you have. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure to have you here in this space.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I love sharing. I love to see what I think and feel on the outside of me, because sometimes I don't even know what it is until it comes out. So thank you for having a space where that's a possibility.
Yeah, again, it's been an honor to hold that space. So thank you for allowing it to come forth.
Yeah.
Wow, what a fabulous conversation that was with Cassia. Thank you again so much, Cassia, for joining me here in this space. And thank you to all the listeners who have tuned in for this beautiful episode. If you would like to stay in contact with Cassia, you can find her through Instagram and Facebook at Dyad Movement. That's DYAD Movement. And Cassia notes that most of what she does in person is in person in her local community, but she's beginning to see that there is a real open space for what she creates in other spaces. So she's beginning to work with Grandma Karina on focalizing her messages and reach online in this new year. Online workshops is something that she is very interested in learning how to craft connections and translate them into flesh and blood experience. She's currently offering dark moon circles in Kimberley that are mythic journeys tied to Celtic and European mythic roots. She weaves in Proto-Celtic language she's learning through the Weaver's Trail pilgrimage with Carolyn Hillier. She's also crafting a local circle to be offered in Kimberley, but possibly online in the future, called Mother Bone. It's a place for women in any phase of the childbearing years to connect and circle around topics of mothering, parenting, and living in our world as generation bridgers. She offers various perinatal movement series, as well, elementally and somatically themed and focused. And she is co-hosting kids circles on the Celtic Wheel of the Year in her community in Kimberley. She finds enjoyment teaching children how to hold sacred spaces in their own lineages, honoring the land and the indigenous lineage of this place, and earth-based animist principles for living. My name is Danya Buak. I am the lead facilitator and founder of Wild Song Yoga School. Thank you all so much for tuning in and for stepping into this space of learning and growing with these potent wisdom keepers. It is a deep honor and a deep blessing to be here curating and magically weaving all of this knowledge for you. So thank you so much. From my heart to each and every one of yours, namaste.